Mistakes and failure of reason occur continually in the exercise of government, and are sometimes recognized afterwards by those who made them. The mistakes made in the programs and theories of political parties are often pointed out by their opponents, but seldom acknowledged by the parties themselves, because the sources of their views are fixed, and the tests to which those views are subjected in practice are never adequate or final, as may be the effect of a single measure or action. I assume that grounds exist in the will of certain men or in their education for the choice that each party makes of its policy. These grounds cannot be rational fundamentally, but they may be consistent in their chosen aims, and irrationality in argument or in action will then appear only if the circumstances are ignored which, at that time and place, may render the execution of that policy impossible. Then any irrational attempt to carry out that policy will be due to ignorance. If we agree to this, we shall be confirming the doctrine of Socrates, that it is knowledge, not accidental desires or opinions, that make conduct rational and right. What Socrates seems to have forgotten to say is that the knowledge requisite to make action rational in this sense lies entirely beyond the reach of mankind. We might be rational in trifles, in taking a bus marked for the place to which we wish to go, but never rational in choosing our political party, and never, if leaders of that party, in choosing the man that our supporters must vote for. These major matters would all have to be decided by habit, accidental impressions, or mysterious intuition. Modern speculation, on the other hand, being introverted, places virtue in sentiment and intention rather than in art, and seeks to found morals on the moral sense or conscience, so that morality, private or public, will be entirely a matter of different intuition and absolute or categorical and spontaneous precept. I should think, however, that at least in politics, the first commandment of the conscience in a responsible statesman would be to understand the world in which he was playing a part and the capacities and genuine needs of the people in whose interests he was acting, so that his moral sense, if it was not a mere prejudice, would bring him back again into the hopeless position of Socrates, demanding, before he could act rightly, a knowledge that he could never possess. Socrates, however, was providentially inspired as a prophet of his time, which was the turning point in the fortunes of ancient Greece. The age of political and politic arts was over, and that of private moral reflection and conversion had begun. His imagination, if we may trust the utopia that Plato puts in his mouth, was archaically political, and Plato's own testament and laws was like the visions of the Hebrew prophets, a transformation of a militant national past into an entrenched religious discipline, like that of the monasteries of the future. He meant to immortalize Sparta and Olympia, but he unwittingly legislated from Mount Athos to Monte Cassino. What I have called the forgetfulness of Socrates in proposing an unattainable criterion for the conduct of life was precisely what made him the herald of 2,000 years of subjectivity and political and scientific disorder. Not that there ensued any dark ages or medieval barbarism of the spirit, but on the contrary, that a long and voluntary flight of the spirit into the wilderness was to develop its dramatic sense of isolation and its fonction fabulatrice, not only in theology, but in a poetic and historic rereading of the world, in romantic and moralistic terms. Has not the time come for mankind to awake to its actual situation, and to that of the spirit that animates it? The sophists, who were in one sense the partners of Socrates, inasmuch as they too represented the dissolution of the classic world, pointed in an opposite direction, in that the corruption of the traditional ethos seemed to them an emancipation, instead of a divine summons to repentance and to an inner discipline of the soul. They abounded in miscellaneous information, as do the intellectuals of our own age, and being more bold and free than any modern can be, they doted on the relativity of knowledge and of morals, as they understood this relativity, namely, that morals and science, goodness and truth, could never be anything but the feeling or thought that each man had of them at each moment. These thoughts and feelings were assumed whenever a sophist, lectured to a company of town wits to be indefinitely numerous and all different, and, as assertions, contradictory, so that the doctrine of relativity might easily be expressed absolutely by saying that all feelings were right and wrong, and all opinions were false, or in the language of Indian philosophy, were all illusions. But the Indians really meant this, and believed that only Brahman, or spirit, was ever real. The sophists, like the British empiricists, who have rediscovered this axiom, are essentially social beings, publicists, orators, teachers, and politicians. To them, the axiom that life is a dream and all objects illusions is taboo. You must never mention it, because it would prick the bubble of your analytic reform of philosophy. Now, when I say that morals and knowledge, not the truth, but opinions regarding the truth, and all judgments about right and wrong, not all goods, are relative, I mean something entirely different. I mean that opinions and judgments are in psyches and express the capacity and inevitableness of such opinions and judgments arising each moment, each psyche. But the degree of their truth depends on the relation that their several deliverances have to the facts that provoke them, and that they mean to refer to, that they refer to something which, essentially, they do not contain, is due to the fact that they are not purely logical or psychological phenomena, but spiritual transcripts of biological processes and tensions, which are all self-transcendent, as are all the phases of existence. Spirit arises in animals when they react, as organisms charged with specific reflexes and potentialities of growth, which specific occasions excite and turn into action. And as these reactions are directed upon the real objects that provoke them, so the spiritual transcript of them also is turned, in expectation, description, and appreciation upon the power that has evoked it. It is in view of this biological status of perception, opinion, and moral judgment that these spiritual events are necessarily relevant to their occasion and relative to the character of the organ that produces them under that stimulus. The degree of truth in ideas and beliefs, and the degree of justice in our judgments, corresponds not directly to their respective objects, which we can be aware of only by their effects, but on the character of the impression we receive and the complex reaction and radiation of that impression within the life of the psyche. Nothing could therefore be more false and willfully ignorant than to maintain, with the Greek sophists and the British empiricists, when both are radical and consistent, that knowledge and judgment refer to nothing and are always equally true and valid, in the sense that each is equally real as a sensation when it is felt. Their relativity, properly understood, far from making opinions and judgments worthless, renders them capable of some degree of truth and justness, since they express the sensibility of the living psyche according to its endowment and development, to the influences that reach it and determine its fate in the natural world. The subjectivity of the sophists and empiricists survives in German philosophy with an interesting difference. As the sophists were publicists, and inconsistently posited a social but not physical world, and the empiricists in England and the United States a moral society, so the German idealists posited a philosophy of history, or a phenomenology of spirit. This they drew from the Bible and from St. Augustine as to history, and from their own inspiration for the romance of spirit. There is more air and light in all this than in the other subjective schools. But I think we may say, of all, without exception, that it is precisely when they are false to their subjective axioms, and feed on common sense, on real history, and on natural science, or even on theology, that they tell us anything worth hearing.